on. There we go. Get so excited about getting going with you guys, forget to check on the buttons. Okay, so the agenda for the next couple of days today, we're going to be working on expanding our understanding. What kind of reactivity? We're looking at some definitions. We're going to start to understand what's behind the pulling. So a lot of you guys were attracted to this webinar because it was like, let's try to solve your dog's pulling. Why are they pulling on leash? Why are they spinning around? Why are they barking and lunging? And so let's really make sure that we've pulled apart all of the different reasons and we understand the behavior. Okay. We're going to be doing a little bit of an activity with your dog's triggers. So when we get to that part, you guys are just going to grab a pen and paper and we're going to work on that. Mary, I see you waving hello. And we're also going to be doing a bit of activity on reading canine body language. And this is going to be a little bit tricky because your dogs are all nice and cozy and asleep. Potentially, if we were in class, we'd be doing something a little bit more interactive, but I've got a video and what I'm going to get you guys to do is sort of practice your canine body language interpretation through that video. We're also going to talk about whose walk is it anyway. And so a lot of us have different reasons for why we walk our dogs or different beliefs around why and where we should walk our dogs. So we're going to pull that part up too. Wednesday and Thursday, as I said, is going to be hands-on. And for those of you who stick it out to the end, who show up on Thursday, you're going to get a special bonus. That special bonus is basically an ebook with a step-by-step training guide for all of the techniques we cover in this workshop. I'm only sending it to you if you're here to the end. Okay. Everybody else, you'll have the recordings as well. Okay. Any questions on that so far? Drop them in the chat. Yeah, so somebody asked, they're not able to participate tomorrow night. Is there a way to see it later? So at the end of every session, once Zoom processes it, I'll be shooting that recording out to you, so you'll get it each day. That gives you a chance to catch up if you need to. Hi, Sheila. Okay. I'm glad you're excited, Susan. We're just starting. Okay, so when you got a dog, even if it's not your first dog, when you got a dog, you probably had a vision for what you thought your walks would be like. And I would love to hear some of those adjectives from you guys. What did you think? If you have a reactive dog, and maybe you don't, and if you don't and you're still here, I think that's amazing. So you thought your walks would be calm. You thought they would be relaxing and peaceful and enjoyable and serene and relaxing and effortless, and that we could stop and say hello to other dogs and they'd be enjoyable and therapeutic and easy. COVID puppy, yes. Predictable walks, being calm and relaxing. Fearless, calm and relaxing. People are laughing. Feel free to also, you can take a look at the chat. In control, effortless and fun exercise. We're going to be talking about exercise in a minute. That anyone could walk her kids or seniors, playing, hiking, subway, coffee, restaurants, people, home, fun, even off leash. Yep, social. Okay, and now we're going to flip the switch. Tell me what your walks are like. Intense, stressful, tense, insane, dodging triggers, exhausting for me, crazy sometimes, non-existent, that's okay. Tense, chaotic, anxious, my back hurts, super alert all the time, stressful and tired, anxiety inducing, on edge, like I'm looking for a stalker. Yep, fair. Crossing the street, constantly, always an adventure, I don't want to go out, right? Horrible, barking at other dogs and lunging. Decent, a lot of foxes. With foxes, I feel like reactivity to foxes is fair game, but I know that's hard. Walking on a harness, and I wish it was loose lead on a collar. Okay, we'll talk about that. Florence, resistance to walking all the way. Blowing leaves or leaf blowers. Cats, triggers, zigzagging. Okay, so there's like a lot. These walks, this is the squirrel. Nipping at big men, triggers at every quarter. I have a reactive dog. I understand what this is like. The good news is that there are 92 of you here right now, and you're all saying the same thing. So I know that quite often with reactive dogs, people are like, it's just my dog. My dog is crazy. I'm alone. I just see other dogs walking along like the happy-go-lucky lab, right? Everybody's seen the lab on TV and the commercials, and they're just blissfully romping through the fields and in the city and having a good time. That's not most dogs. Okay. The fact that there are 100 of you ish here, and I'm expecting like a few more people, and the people who signed up because they couldn't make it but are interested, which is about 200 more people, tells you that you're not alone, right? That your dog's behavior is not abnormal. It's not your fault, right? You didn't cause something, you didn't, right? So take some comfort in that as we go forward. And I'm just going to scroll up a bit because I see someone that said that seeing these responses makes them feel much less alone. And that's super important, right? It's really easy to go for a walk, be overwhelmed, come back and just think, oh, it's just my dog. It's not just your dog. It's at least 100 other people just like this and more. And guess what? A whole bunch of you live in the same cities too. So what does that tell you, right? You just don't see each other because all of you are doing the things that you're actually supposed to be doing when you have a reactive dog. So you might actually never see each other, right? Which from a trainer's perspective, for the time being, is perfect. And we'll be talking about why. So the one thing that I want to preface everything by saying is that a health check is something that as a trainer ethically, I very, very much believe in. A lot of behavior problems are caused or related to undiagnosed, undetected health pain, right? Things that you don't necessarily know about your dog, or things that, again, aren't diagnosed, things that often don't get picked up in your yearly check, right? I mean, your yearly vet check is pretty comprehensive, but it doesn't always check for everything. And so when I'm working with clients, especially clients where they've all of a sudden behavior has changed, we always want to rule out health. And a lot of people will say, my dog's not sick. They don't, they haven't thrown up, they haven't done this. But we might look at things like thyroid levels. We might look at things as like stress in the adrenal levels. We might look at discomfort. We might look at growing puppies, adolescents, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, senior dogs, or a dog that just might have a crick in its neck and so can't really turn this way. And when another dog comes toward it, it's protecting itself, but we think it's gone crazy. And so it's really, really important to also understand that health and well-being has a huge impact on behavior. We're not going to go into that any further. If that's something that you wanted to talk about, I would ask you to book a call or talk to the trainer or talk to the vet that you're working with primarily. Okay. So there are two kinds, and this is where I'm going to pop up the first poll. There are two general buckets of reactivity, and we're talking about the excited, frustrated, potentially greeter, or the fearful or anxious dog. And we're just going to mute everybody. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to get you guys this poll popping up on your screen, and we're just going to watch it over on the side here. Okay. Give you guys a few seconds. Can you guys see the poll answers too? Yeah. Okay. I love this. Okay. So we have quite a bit of both. We have, overexcited, eager greeter that sometimes if you have one of those dogs, the overexcited, eager greeter doesn't look like they're all that friendly often, right? And we'll talk about why that is. Okay, has everybody had a chance to, okay, most people have participated. That's awesome. So you get to kind of see, and I kind of wanted to see what the makeup is. And so 51% of you were saying that your dogs are both overexcited or nervous, depending on the situation, which is pretty common. And then we have 15% who are saying it's, because this was a pick one answer only. So anxious, nervous, and social distancing is their operating system. They would just rather that everybody stay, probably more than 6 feet away, if that's your dog. And then you have the overexcited greeter, but sometimes frustrated greeter with dogs or other people. Okay, and that's 34%. So we're just going to end that. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. Was everybody most people were comfortable with answering the poll? So that's your first one. There's going to be a couple of other ones that pop up. Okay. I'll just kind of do this. All right. This beautiful yellow line has just sort of appeared in the middle of my screen. It wasn't there yesterday. It's there today, and it wasn't there earlier. Now it's just there all the time. Okay, so it looks like it's just a smile. Just like my slides are smiling at you guys. Okay, so both types, the frustrated, overexcited greeter and your stay away, they have one thing in common. And most of the time, it's that your dog's level of arousal overrides their ability to process anything else. So I've heard some of you tell me that your dog forgets their name. They can't sit. They can't turn around. They don't even know that you are there because they are so fixated on whatever it is that's caught their attention, whatever it is that they're super excited about or maybe a little bit nervous about. Does that resonate with you guys when you're trying to work with your dogs? Nobody's home and nothing's happening. And then you'll often hear people say, and my dog won't take food. Or a lot of times people will say, my dog's not food motivated outside. And we'll talk about why that is in a little bit, but it's pretty common. It's not just your dog, and they are not broken. Yeah, did I annotate by accident? Did somebody annotate? Are you drawing on my screen? Okay, let's go. Let's see. Oh, look. All right. Let's take that out. So why is your dog's walk important to you? And you guys have sort of answered this question, what you thought walks would be like, but drop in the chat if you get a chance. What is your priority when you walk your dog? Why is your dog's walk important to you? Just drop me some ideas here. Oh, fast and furious, 26 new things to read. Okay, exercise and bonding, exercise, potty, enrichment, mental exercise for both of us, enrichment. Okay, socializing, bonding, all of the above, everything, all the time. Training. Want them to have a good time. Going to the bathroom. I mean, going to the bathroom is sort of a given, right? If you don't have, especially if you don't have a backyard. Use up energy. Hi, Timber. If your dogs pop on screen, I'm cool. It's fine. If your dogs start barking at something, you need to go off and attend to it. That's what we're here for. You can go and do that. Okay. Mental stimulation. Awesome. So there's a number of different reasons why our dog's walk is important to us. And all of them are true. All of them are correct. But when you have a reactive dog, you can't always meet those needs in the way that you would like, right? So if we pair what you thought your walk would be like, glorious, peaceful, amazing, and the needs that we're trying to meet for our dogs, obviously there's going to be a disconnect when you have a reactive dog. It's not going to be as easy to do that. So on the flip side, we have why we walk our dogs and what we hoped it would be. And then we have dogs, Mallory's come back in, but we have dogs that pull on our leash, and there's a whole set of beliefs around why dogs pull on leash. And I'm just going to bang off without going into too much detail. Some myths around why dogs pull. They want to dominate us. They're controlling the walk. And I mean, controlling from a physically controlling. We aren't the alpha. They're protecting us. They're wearing a harness, right? So lots of myths, which we're going to debunk a little bit at a time. Okay. These are myths. None of these things are true. Dogs pull on leash because they walk faster than we do. They have 4 legs. Your dog will, generally speaking, unless you're like a sprinter, most dogs will outrun you, right? Depending on their size, health, breed, temperament. Like most of us could probably outrun an English bulldog, but not all of us, right? So generally speaking, your dogs walk faster. They walk faster than we do. It gets them where they want to go faster. So if they want to be 3 feet ahead of you and you're just not fast enough, they're going to walk faster and pull you, right? There's environmental influences. We're going to talk about those as well today. And then there's emotional stimulus. There's also a little bit controversial. Your leash is too short. And we're going to talk about this one tomorrow, but I'm just going to plant the seed with you guys for a little bit because it is pretty common for people to think that when they need to control their dog, they need a shorter leash. And that's sometimes true from a you feel more in control. But often what happens with a shorter leash, especially if your dog is just sort of trying to pull you to go sniff, you get pulled because your leash is too short. Okay. So leash handling, learning loose leash walking skills is actually a skill on both ends. And I can see some grads on the camera right now who are kind of nodding because for a lot of them, I was like 6 feet. Of course you're going to get pulled. 6 feet is like 2 arms, right? And your dog can walk 6 feet out from you very, very quickly. So I'm not going to try and convert everybody, but just know that sometimes your leash is too short is something that I'm going to say. All right. So what's behind the pulling? And typically if we're going to just sort of listen to people at a high level, it's going to be because my dog is stubborn and they're just pulling and pulling and pulling. Or they have poor walking skills. They just don't know how to walk on a leash properly. That's the tip of our iceberg. That's what we see typically when we're out on the street. If we go to the bottom, right, that portion of the iceberg that sunk the Titanic, lack of experience, dogs and people on both sides, relying on tools over training. This is why sometimes I'm in Facebook groups, people are asking questions and everyone's like, get this harness and get that harness. And yes, harnesses will help you to a point. So like the Easy Walk harness, I'm sure everyone's heard of. But they don't necessarily stop your dog from pulling. If a dog in an Easy Walk harness really wants to pull you, they'll pull you. They'll just be kind of twisted sideways as they do it, right? There's all kinds of other tools too that people tend to rely on to solve reactivity. It doesn't always work, right? Senses being overstimulated, adolescence, I have a whole slide on that. We'll talk about that. Pop in if you have a dog that's between 6 months and 2 years old. Okay. Lots of you. Okay. So we're going to talk about adolescence. All right. Previous leash experience, yours and theirs. Lack of mental enrichment, but you're like, wait a minute, I'm taking my dog to get mental enrichment. That's why we go for a walk. So let's talk about that. Fear and frustration, lack of confidence, breed-specific movements. And what I mean about that, and I don't mean to pick on the English Bulldog, but an English Bulldog and many other breeds like that, or Malamutes and Huskies, and we have a couple of those here today. Some dogs, down low, they're like, if your dog is closer to the ground, it's actually much easier for them to pull you, right? Their center of gravity is a lot lower. Some dogs really pull into walking with their chest. That's not necessarily all breeds, but a lot of them do. So some breed specific movements make things like that a little bit trickier. Lack of early socialization. And then this one's at the bottom, but it's not really the last one. So just sort of think of all of these things on par with each other, is learned and practiced behaviors. So today we're going to pick apart each of these. And if we don't get to all of them, we'll kind of pick them out over the next couple of days. Does 3 years old count? He lacks like an adolescent. Yeah, right. So it just kind of depends. For most breeds, adolescence is over by 2. But we all know that like there are dogs that are just a little bit more teenage like for just a little bit longer. They mature a little bit slower. Sometimes it's their personality, sometimes it's genetics and biology, right? So there are some dogs who are like 7 and they're all bouncy. Okay, so we're going to go through these bit by bit. I am going to talk pretty quickly, but I did give you guys a heads up. We're going to be here for about an hour and a half. I just want to make sure we get through everything and have the opportunity to have some dialogue. Okay. So the definition of a loose leash is that it's not taut. It's not straight. It doesn't look like my arm. It looks a bit more like a smile. There's a nice J shape or a nice U shape between you and the dog. And a good measure of this is that the leash clip, regardless of whether it's in the front or the back, is pointing downwards. It's not horizontal. Okay. And then defining your position. And this isn't my definition of where your dog should walk. It's you can have your dog walking at your side. You can have your dog walking at the front. Some people want their dog walking in a heel, at least for short portions of the walk. And some dogs prefer to walk behind you. Okay. I saw a question pop. Okay. So we're going to talk about the heel position a little bit. A true heel where the dog is walking, lockstep beside you through your walk. Is hard to maintain throughout, for most dogs, not more than a few minutes. If our goal for our dog is that they're enjoying their walk, for the most part, that formal heel position isn't really something that they enjoy. It's very expensive for them in terms of energy and focus. Okay. And it's not terribly enjoyable. If they're healing right next to you, they probably aren't, looking around at the world, taking in the world. But if they're to your side, you can still have that loose leash walk. So there are a couple of trainers in the room today, and I would love to hear from you guys in the chat. How many of you are fine if your dog walks ahead of you or beside you as long as they don't pull? And then the rest of you can chime in too, but it might surprise quite a few people here that a lot of trainers are not like, no, I don't want my dog to walk in a heel, right? We might train them to walk in a close position to us because we need them to sometimes. Cross the street, avoid people, move around cars, tight spaces. Yes, then I want you to be able to walk close to me, but I don't require it as a walk. Yeah. Side, front, as long as they don't pull. Okay. Yes, if your dog walks too fast for you, period, right? Especially if there's, for a lot of people, if there's a sort of stride length difference significantly between you and your dog, that can be a little bit tricky. So your dog is just walking, but you're jogging, right? That's definitely a bit more of a challenge. Okay. Sniffari. Who's heard of the term a sniffari? Or a sniff walk? Right. So this is the kind of walk where everyone's like, yes, I have great. I'm going to be encouraging you guys to do lots of these with your dog, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. But in a safari, your dog leads. So they choose where they're going, even if they're on a leash. They get to explore. They get the opportunity to sniff at their leisure. Typically, it's done on a harness to take any kind of pressure off around their neck, and you have a little bit of a longer leash. It's very hard to give your dog a sniff walk when you only have 6 feet to work with. But a safari doesn't have to be done on a walk. If you have a backyard, if you have sort of the back corner of a field or a park at like off hours, you can do that. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about how you can create safari-like experiences for your dog in your home, in your garage, in your backyard. And while it is, sniff is in the name, but there's a lot more to sniffing than just the smelling, right? And the benefits it has for your dog. So we're going to be talking about that quite a bit. Okay. Adolescent stage. Roughly between the ages of 4 and 24 months. Think of, if anybody of you have been around human teenagers, just think about what they are like. And then we're going to slide over to dogs, okay? They become bigger, physically stronger. They can have imbalances in their developing bodies. Some of you might say they have imbalances in the brain, but that's because of hormone levels, right? So things are always changing. And a lot of adolescent dogs are more likely to engage in risky behaviors to get fulfillment, right? So you might have noticed that your puppy before would stay closer to you. They were happy to stay closer to you. They kind of checked in with you a little bit more. And now you've got a dog that's, 4 to 24 months, maybe a little bit older, and they're not as concerned about where you are, right? They're much more interested and much more willing to get fulfillment from outside of your little your little walking bubble. And so all of this has an impact on, reactivity and arousal and things like that. My dog sniffs a lot on walks, but wants to pick up acorns. And yesterday he picked up a dead snake. I don't envy you that at all. But at least it was dead. That's the part that I'm going to take from that. At least it wasn't a live steak. Okay. So let's talk about reactivity. Now, if we're talking about reactivity, we're going to say that like every dog, every human is reactive, right? Very few of us encounter the world, we just sit there and have like nothing happening, right? So what we're talking about potentially when we talk about reactivity is an overreactive response, right? A response that has more intensity than we'd expect in that situation. And that's why we tend to use the word now reactivity as opposed to potentially the words that we used to use before, which is aggression. Now, when your dog is spinning around on leash and barking and yelling and, lunging, certainly it is aggressive behavior, but it is an overreactive response that, is more than we would expect in the situation. So it's also important to understand the situations, and we're going to be looking at those. One of the things that, has sort of come about in terms of labeling things when we're talking about aggression is that for the dogs that are truly, and I probably shouldn't use the word truly, but for dogs that are acting in an aggressive manner are usually dogs that are trying to create distance. So I'm just going to pick on Lynn because she's in my corner here. If I ran straight at Lynn in an aggressive kind of way, she would back up. And if you have one of those nervous, anxious dogs, a lot of the times that display is intended to create space. A lot of, nervous, reactive dogs are really not looking to start a fight. They would just, because that's expensive behavior too. Confrontations are risky, right? But if I can act big and scary like they tell us to when you encounter certain kinds of bears, that's the goal. Be aggressive, be bigger, be fierce, and they will back away. Yes. I see some comments a little bit about breeds, and if I have time, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Another one, Lucy goes crazy at old dogs are not interested in her. She's a brat or she's frustrated. So we'll talk about that. And dogs suddenly becoming aggressive when they see other dogs, right? And so that to me is they're not comfortable when they suddenly see other dogs, right? So let's just sort of park those definitions for a bit, but keep those like in the back of your brain. Okay, so let's look at those two types that you guys gave me. So excited, eager greeter. So the dog is excited and eager to interact with the trigger. And we're going to say that a trigger is a dog, person, an object, a noise, or an experience. Okay, so the dog displays behaviors of excitement that intended to decrease distance. It might look like just the other ones, but they look the same. So jumping, barking, spinning, pulling. When the interaction for some dogs is not immediately available or is restricted, the dog becomes frustrated or anxious and things escalate, right? So your dog is super exciting. You're like, no, we're not saying hello today. Or no, you can't jump on the baby in the stroller, or you can't go play with the kids. And your dog becomes anxious or frustrated, then they escalate. And then you're like, my dog looks like they want to kill something, but really they're friendly, right? We've heard that. We've all seen dogs and heard people say, but they're friendly. And you're like, I don't believe you. Okay. The behavior that your dog is displaying gets reinforced when there's interaction with the trigger. So if you have an excited greeter, and this happens a lot with puppies, and they're just pulling and they're barking and they want to say hello, and then your dog gets a bit stronger and they're actually able to pull you across the street. Or you're like, okay, the best way to get this to stop, because I know they don't mean any harm, they're not going to hurt whatever it is that they're pulling towards, we'll just go over there. Right? That becomes problematic because your dog learns that those feelings get reinforced and it worked, right? And so the dog has had the opportunity to practice this behavior with a predictable outcome. Now I want to make it like a big header over this. It's not that your dog is planning this out, right? They're not like, it works and I'm going to manipulate it. So the way that dogs operate is what works versus what doesn't work. And that is usually based on what's reinforced or what's safe or not safe, right? So a really easy example for this that everybody understands is when your dog wants a treat, they look at you and they sit. Why? Because you've been reinforcing that from the time you got your dog. Sit, treat, sit, treat, sit, treat, sit, treat. So that behavior dogs have learned gets us treats. On the flip side, let's say you have a show dog or a dog that you spend a lot of time with in conformation or in show, and they need to stand. They're not supposed to be sitting in the ring. Like they need to stand in a certain way. And so a stand for them is something that's been super, super, super reinforced, and that becomes something that they've internalized and they default to. Okay. On the flip side, let's look at the other. If you have the uncomfortable, fearful, or anxious dog, again, with the trigger, dog, person, object, noise, or experience, the dog displays behaviors intended to discourage the trigger from advancing or increasing. And we've all seen that dog, right? You're walking towards dog, you see a dog in the distance, might be mine, who's like having a meltdown. And you're like, okay, no, we're not going to do that right now. The behavior is reinforced when the trigger stops or changes. And the dog has had the opportunity to practice this pattern with the predictable outcome. So it works for them. And another example of this would be a dog looks out the window, sees something out the window, is not comfortable with it, bark, 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 bark. And the thing goes by the window, and the dog's like, oh, great, okay, it's gone. I can stop now. For some dogs, that might take several minutes. For some dogs, it's really short. But what happened? If the dog was trying to get distance, to get the thing to go away, person walking down the street was going to walk down the street anyway. They were going to walk past your house anyway. They were going to go away anyway, but your dog doesn't know that, right? So their fear, their management of their own fear gets reinforced, right? So barking and charging unknown dogs create space even though they're closing the distance between each other, because for some dogs, the odds that they're working on is that the other dog is going to back up, right? If you have two dogs that are going at it, past a certain point, they've decided that they're going to have a confrontation, right? So initially, it's going to be to create space. It can change very quickly to you're not going anywhere fast enough, bring it on, right? And we don't want that. Somebody said their dog whines and cries to see every dog on the street. That's your frustrated greeter for sure. Yep. So mine stands on her hind legs when she spots, and that's to try and get closer, see what I need to be able to see. Some breeds do that more than others. Other dogs have just learned that they can see better when they stand up. Okay. Wildlife, same thing. Raccoons, again, it's going to depend. With wildlife, it's going to depend on your dog. For most dogs, it's interest. All right. It's an interest. I have a terrier, so. Okay, so trigger stacking. This is like, think of triggers here. I'm going to play this video. The sound is not going to be on for you guys because I was having trouble getting the sound to go at the same pace when streaming to a large group, but we're going to just take a look at this. Okay. There we go. And it should play. While we wait for it to queue up. So talking about triggers and trigger stacking, a trigger is anything that causes your dog to react. So it can have a positive impact. It can have a negative impact. So let's think about triggers in our own lives, right? I'm sure you don't have to think too hard of things that trigger you negatively, but there's things that are positive, like moving, right? So moving, super exciting, also super stressful. Weddings, super exciting, also super stressful. For our dog, there are events that stack up over the course of the day, and we're going to take a look at each of those things. But it's important to keep in mind that triggers aren't just the big blowouts that we think of when our dog has a reaction. Triggers can be people walking by the window. Triggers can be the doorbell, but triggers can also be being on alert for things they're not sure of. Okay. So you can have a variety of triggers. Some are good, some are exciting. They had a super exciting time at the park. That's good, right? But it has an impact on your dog's arousal levels, their ability to be calm and things like that. It's good I wasn't relying on this video because again, it played earlier, but now it doesn't. And triggers are like candles. This is one of my favorite kind of comparisons. So bear with me here. So we've got this one little candle, one trigger, not really a big deal, right? The more triggers your dog encounters, the more intense the heat. When we're talking about stress and arousal levels and excitement and their ability to chill out. So the more triggers, the more intense the heat, the harder it is to put out the flame. Does that resonate for you guys? Drop that in the chat. Tell me if that makes sense, right? And so you'll often hear people say, well, my dog just reacted out of the blue. And then we'll be having a conversation. You'll be like, but we had people over and there was a car ride and they were chasing squirrels earlier and then I dropped a pot, right? So all of those things from our dog's perspective, like we as human beings potentially do a better job at managing our stress and our triggers. People who have been in classes with me, or if you've had a call with me, have probably heard this, another comparison. But think about your average work week. Think about if you had a really great weekend and you're rested and you feel really good. So you go into work Monday and you're like, I got this. This is great. Awesome. Something kind of puts you off at work. It's not really a big deal. Something else happens Tuesday and then the plumbing goes out. You're like, oh, okay, fine. Wednesday, there's a traffic jam. Maybe the kids are sick. We're not really sure if we can get our flu shot, not get a flu shot. We can go out, we can't go out. There's people, you're running late for work. By Thursday, not really feeling it. Okay, you get to Friday and you're a long way away from the weekend that passed. And somebody asked you to do something at work or in your life that's, let's say, due Friday at 5:00, but they ask you at 3:30. Your reaction to that in that moment is going to be far different than if they asked you at Monday when you were nice and rested and they gave you, right? So think about trigger stacking in your life, compare it to your dog's. Okay. I see lots of commentary, so I'm going to come back to those, but I just want to scroll through them. If you have more than one dog, it is quite common that they feed off of each other's triggers. We'll talk about that. Yeah, the more triggers, the more aroused she is when we get home. What if multiple triggers are happening, but I'm only aware of the doorbell, for example, and I think her trigger is the doorbell? So again, it might be that that's the case. We're going to look at everything else that happened in that day potentially, right? And if the trigger is a doorbell, one of the things to remember is that our dogs learn from their triggers, not in the way that we want them to. But every time a trigger happens, it reinforces what they feel about that trigger over and over and over and over and over and over again. You never ring the doorbell and bones fall from the sky. Like that doesn't happen. And even if it did just once, that wouldn't be enough to change their minds, right? So triggers, when they happen over and over and over again, just like with us, reinforce your fears or your belief about a certain thing, right? Same with the dog. Okay. There's some people are saying, yes, the first time you shared it hit perfectly. Some people have heard that comparison quite a bit, but it's because I know we can all relate to it. There's a point where there's so many triggers that she can no longer focus on any one thing and it becomes a little bit easier going. So I've seen that also, but we want to really be sure and careful about whether that's what we actually want, as opposed to just like too many things. So if there's a lot of things happening that don't phase your dog, then we wouldn't necessarily define it as a trigger. We would just potentially just keep an eye on the fact that this is something that we need to pay attention to, right? My dog feeds off my mood. Dog is fine with cars at the beginning of walk. Yep. And so sometimes you'll hear, sorry, Monty, no bones from the sky. So that's quite common too, where you'll see your walk with your dog or something will happen and you'll say, okay, but the first 3 dogs were fine. And then the 4th dog, like it was just out of the blue, but they were fine. Chances are your dog was maybe fine for the first one, and then the second one, and then the third one. So think of that as Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. By the time Friday rolls around, they have tried so hard to do whatever it is that you want or to keep it together, and then they just can't take it anymore. So some people tried to say, okay, well, was it something about that 3rd dog or that 4th dog and not the 1st and 2nd dog? Sometimes, yes, right? Depending on the dog and how that other dog was reacting. And other times it was just your dog was doing fine outwardly. Doesn't necessarily mean they were fine internally, right? And so they've hit a certain level. Again, that's still trigger stacking. 1 dog, 2 dog, 3 dog, 4 dog is still trigger stacking. Okay. But they're not actually okay. Right. And so we want to make sure that we keep an eye on that. Okay, so we're going to jump into our first activity. And this is where I really want you guys, if you have paper, notebook, iPad, phone, whatever it is you want, we're going to do a little bit of an activity on what your dog's triggers are. And I'm going to just kind of leave this up for a second, but this is the kind of detail we want to be talking about. So most of the time we say it's another dog. But what size of dog, what age of dog, what was the other dog doing? How far away were they? What direction were they walking in? What environment are you in? What time of day was it? What other noises are around? How long did it take your dog to recover? So when we're thinking about our dog's triggers, that's where you want to get down, really into the weeds. Other animals, right? My terrier is fine if there's a squirrel hanging from the tree. If the squirrel is running up the tree, we're not okay. FedEx trucks, because we know that that's an issue. What time of day? What's happened before? What is the sight or the sound? Same driver, different driver, boxes, packages, doorbell, knocking, right? What? There's parameters around that. I see a few people clutching their heads. Right? But when we're working through our dog's triggers, and for example, if you were in class with me, these are the kinds of things that we really want to get into, because it's oversimplifying it to say it's the FedEx truck. Right? For your dog, there's all kinds of things that happen in with that. Deliveries. There's 2 deliveries here. Oh, deliveries when left alone. If your dog's alone and there's a delivery. Other animals, new people. So I'm going to give you guys about 5 minutes. I'm sure you can all think of the triggers that are paramount in your dog's world. I'm just going to take a quick pause and take a drink. Letitia and Fred are commiserating every animal out on the street. So about 5 minutes, just work through a trigger. You don't have to post in the chat, keep it for yourselves. I mean, you can share in the chat too, but you don't need to. Melanie, I feel your pain. When people are done, I'll share a story. Movements out of the apartment, neighbors in the hall. Yeah, okay. If you have time, you can do more than one. Just jot your notes for yourself. What I love about what you guys are sharing in the chat is you've all clearly given your dog's triggers lots of thought. Grace, your twin brother dog's talking about staying at home is really challenging. I'd love for you to, I make the same offer to everybody at the end. I have a couple of spots left if you guys would like to book a call. Or 25-minute call is free of charge. But Grace, the situation that you're talking about is certainly an over arousal. They're certainly triggering off each other and a lot of anxiety. And so if you were looking at trying to address that, there's a couple of different layers we'd want to work through you with that. Wenting, I'm reading yours. Helmets, doorbell, thunder. Yeah, weather can be a trigger. Hearing planes, movement, chaos. The fun police, Edgar. The fun police, other animals. Okay. Okay. Squirrels. I have a game for that. Dogs who look at him, sound of paper, dental floss, like dental floss coming out of the thing. Thunder, rats, squirrels. Okay. So keep your notes, just keep them to the side because we're going to be working. We're going to come back to that. Collar and tags jingling. There's some fun things you can do with working through that. Hair dryer. A trigger. A couple of you have said swearing. So I had a pot boil over once. I mean, more than once, but once a pot boiled over and I ran towards it and I was swearing. And now I get yelled at whenever I swear. Like if I get up suddenly because I've forgotten something and I swear, I get like yelled at. And again, that is, yes, fun police, but your dog learned something about that moment, right? So being worried or being upset because the pot boiled over and then you ran, so energy was, heightened, was not a good scene, and then you put a lovely cue on it by swearing. And now they've got like whenever they hear that sound, even if you were just cheering for your favorite team on the TV, your dog predicts that something bad is going to happen. Okay. Lynn, being covered at all, coats, sweaters, collars, as in when your dog is covered or when people are covered? I'm going to interpret that as like stressed out when there's coats, sweaters, or having anything that's on them. Yeah.
It's when I put a coat or a cover on her and even a collar, and she loves her walks. So that's a weird dissociation. I always joke that she doesn't like to be oppressed in any way.
The physical sensation. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Andrea, I don't know where you are, but I'm guessing Australia or New Zealand because you have wombats and kangaroos. So some of us, worry about other dogs and raccoons. Some of you worry about wombats and kangaroos. Yeah, a gasp, a mouse under the stove, right? And you gasp, and now when you gasp, your dog runs to see if they can catch something. That's like, it's amazing. So yeah, the vacuum. Right. Okay. So keep those to the side. We're going to revisit them. Okay. I'm just trying to be mindful of the time. Jot a quick little note. Let's use eating as your baseline. Eating is when most dogs are eating at home when they're safe and relaxed, okay, is when most dogs are, asleep or when they're at their most relaxed. And everything else kind of builds on that. Now, this is just an example, right? If this is your baseline, for most of you, your dogs are going up and up and up and up and up and up. Okay. And I think it's time for I think it's time for no, it's not there. Okay. Let's do that one. Okay. Let's talk about body language a little bit. We'll set triggers to the side for a bit, but we're going to revisit them tomorrow. Reading body language is super important when it comes to reactive dogs because it gives you often information about what your dog is feeling before it happens or before it really, really escalates. Now, there's some things that we notice, because we all have dogs in our lives, that are, hi Dublin, that are obvious, right? But I want you guys to take a look at this again. There's not going to be any sound, or hopefully it will work. And I'll hit play and it will play, but it's not going to. So I have a backup plan. So, okay. So we've all heard guys, I tested all of this like an hour before and things played. But what I'll do is I'll try to drop you guys a Google folder or something where you guys can watch these videos and get a sense for what I was going to show you. Honestly, like best laid plans. So here's some ideas on our dog's mouth. You all have dogs with you. Look at their mouths. What do they look like right now? Drop it in the chat. Are they closed? Actually, we'll do this quick. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Your dog's mouth are closed. It's relaxed. If your dog's mouth is open, what does that C-shaped corner look like? Is it just kind of soft C, kind of relaxed? If you have a dog with you right now that's a little bit anxious and their mouth is open and they're panting, you might actually see that the corners of that mouth are pulled back a little bit tighter. This is probably not very attractive as I'm looking at you guys with this. How many of you guys, when your dog is a little bit stressed out, you've seen that mouth kind of pull back into like that, I like to call it kind of like the Joker's grin. It's really, really tight. And it's not a loose, I'm tired pant. It's a stressed out pant. Is that familiar? Okay. So when you're watching your dog and you're walking around, you want to see that kind of like happy. And when you notice that change, because sometimes that changes before anything else, those of us with dogs with beards, this is a downfall. Can't see. Okay. But for other people, you're able to see that just a little bit more clearly. Tail. We used to say that, well, but the tail was wagging, so they're happy. There's all kinds of different tail wags. So super loose, waggy tail. I have a video of it in here. Chances are, relaxed dog. How many of you have dogs whose tails kind of, they go up and they wag, but it's slow? Give me a thumbs up. How many of you have dogs whose tails go up and just kind of flick, kind of stiff? Right. And a bunch of you are dropping in some really good insight. We have taken away for a lot of breeds, a lot of dogs, their ability to express that because we've docked their tails. Right. So if you've got a dog with a little nubbin or like a 2/3 of a tail, Logan has like 2/3 of his tail, we've taken away that full expression. Right. So yeah, so tight, quick wagging, not so relaxed, not so friendly, right? Or not so sure. But if you've got that super butt, that super quick nubbing where the hips are also moving, right? We call it, the butt wiggle, a little bit more relaxed. But for those, I'm sure that all of you have seen your dog's tails kind of go up and they're moving, but their hips are not. Right. So it's all kinds of things. There's also sort of breed handicaps, if you will, and they're handicapped because we as humans have done the breeding and selected for appearance. I know there's a whole bunch of you here with terriers that might have truncated tails or just naturally express their excitement or their frustration with a straight up, right? Their tail goes straight up in the air. And a lot of dogs will perceive that as confrontational because it is, right? And they don't necessarily have those long plumes to kind of wag at, right? A bunch of you have Aussies, there is no tail. So you're forced to rely on some other means of reading their body language, as are the dogs that they come across. So let's talk about ears. Drop in the chat different ear carriage and what you've seen in your dogs and what you think they mean. This is how we get interactive when my videos don't play. So ears, pulling back, flat against the head, pinned back against the skull. Everybody's on, pulled back and they're stiff. Yep. Extreme clamped down forward. Pulled back, half alert, upright. Yep. And so even those of us who have, the floppy ear dogs, you can tell there's a difference in the carriage, right? Whether they're forward or whether they're like pulled back. It's amazing the number of muscles that are in that, right? And they can do it. Right? Up and alert versus soft and down. Exactly. The last one that we're going to talk about, and you'll see it in the video when I send it to you, is head turns. So let's stare into the camera with you guys right now. If a dog, let's say, encounters a trigger, let's say that trigger is another dog, and your dog or the other dog looks at your dog, when they turn their head, their whole body follows. Right? They're just sort of softly arcing away, their whole body goes. Right? It's a pretty relaxed dog most of the time. If you have a dog that keeps their body square on and kind of does this, it's a lot less relaxed, right? They're not feeling safe enough to turn their body away. They're breaking eye contact as if to say, I need a little bit of okay, don't want to stare at you, a little bit of a break. but they're not comfortable enough to move their whole body away from whatever it is that's facing them. You may also have a dog that keeps straight at, but constantly looks away, and you get that sort of whale eye effect. And that whale eye effect is a pretty straight, you can see the whites of your dog's eyes, your dog is pretty aroused, pretty much on edge. So a lot of people will say, well, my dog turned around. And then I want you guys to sort of look at your dog. Did they turn around? Did they turn their whole body around, or did they just turn their head, right? Dogs have appeasing signals for other dogs, ways to signal that they're not going to be a threat. They might see another dog, they're not so sure, and just kind of go off and sniff. Sure, maybe they smelled hamburger on the ground, or they were trying to signal to the other dog that they're not a threat. If you have a super reactive dog, chances are that's not something that your dog does very often, right? But you might see it, if you're lucky, you'll see it in other dogs that are kind of going, okay, they're freaking out, and they just kind of go away. If you have dogs in a situation, maybe that's not other dogs, where you see that you're trying to gauge if they're comfortable, pay attention to what their face is doing, right? And that's why, as trainers and people who sort of follow dog behavior, the endless videos on the internet about dogs that are guilty are actually dogs that are sitting there, they're not super comfortable, so they're not going to leave, and they're looking down and away. And social media is like, guilty. Dog knows that they're guilty. Well, dogs can't feel guilt. They can't. They lack the space in the brain that's devoted to like processing things like guilt and morality and judgment. They can't do it. So it is a dog that's very uncomfortable with however the person who's filming or the person who's, talking to them, did you know that? Did you do that? You're a bad boy. They're reacting to that. They don't feel guilty, but they are very, very uncomfortable. Okay. All right. Okay. We are going to run a little over time. Is that okay with you guys? If we run super overtime, I'll push some stuff to tomorrow. But so let's talk about managing distance. And this is true whether you have the excited greeter or whether you have the fearful and anxious dog. And the reason that it's true, the reason that distance is going to be the first priority, and I can see some people who've graduated or have trained with me, they're like smiling because I'm like, not far enough, is because what we talked about before. So your dog is exhibiting behaviors either to get closer to or to come further away. And so if you are not far enough for the anxious dog, they're not going to be able to keep it together. For the overexcited greeter, if you're not far enough, they're getting the chance to reinforce being super, super excited about greeting that other person or that other dog. So managing your distance such that your dog can remain neutral is key to successful sort of management and training for reactive dogs. Okay. So managing distance, my sort of rule of thumb is people are going to say, so Stacy says distance is your friend. It's yes. And in the city, it's hard to manage distance, definitely. But there's ways that, different things that we can talk about. So managing distance, people will often say, but we were across the street. Okay. But it's not how far you think you need to be. It's how far your dog needs you to be. Right. So everything about training with reactivity is working at your dog's pace. And I'll say this a little bit later because I say it all the time, is the biggest pitfall or the biggest sort of stumbling block that I see with people who are trying to work on their dog's reactivity is they are going by what they think their dog should be comfortable with versus what their dog is actually comfortable with. It's usually a lot farther away than is convenient for us. But when it comes to training, that's the key, right? Key portion for this. Okay. So reading canine body language, you guys are going to get this in as a PDF too, but red zone, yellow zone, green zone. I'm going to take a drink. If you guys can see my screen, I'm going to let you kind of go through and read what these look like. Give me a thumbs up when you've kind of gone through. You can give me a thumbs up on screen too. Screen or in the chat. Awesome. Okay, next poll. Nope, sorry, poll's coming up. How many of you, thumbs up on the screen, how many of you would say that when you're out on a walk, your dog is in the green zone? Sometimes, yeah, it depends. Cool. As a default, we'll say kind of like where they're at, right? How many of you, when you're on a walk, your dog experiences at least one yellow zone? Okay. And how many of you, your dogs on a walk will experience one red zone? Okay. And so because this is a kind of a ladder, you go out the door, your dogs are in the green, sometimes they're right in the yellow. We're going to talk about this tomorrow. But it's an escalation, right? So I would say most dogs don't necessarily walk out the door in the red zone, but they can get there pretty quick. Right? And this is also going to be like, it's not necessarily linear. They can go back up and down and, through, but the more that your dog experiences things at the red and the yellow zone, like with the candles, it's much harder to get them back down into the green zone. And so sometimes you'll have the goal of exercise and decompression and relaxation. That's your goal when you head out the door. You go for a walk and your dog bounces up and down between green and yellow, red and green and yellow, red and yellow, red and yellow, red and red and red and red and red. And then you come back home. And the goal for your walk was to have a nice, relaxed dog. But instead, your dog is just off the charts. They are not relaxed. They're keyed up. Okay. Okay. Where would I put huffing? I would say yellow. Can everybody still see my screen? Just taking a, yeah, okay. Good. So while we know what now we know what the zones are and what the behaviors look like, I want to urge everybody, and we'll talk about why in a second. I want to urge people to start describing your dog's behaviors, not just with me, but in general, describing your dog's behaviors instead of labeling it. It is really easy as human beings for us to just label things. We do it all the time, right? Stubborn, happy, lazy, crazy, aggressive, dramatic. Those are just labels. And as human beings, when we start to use labels for things, it actually prevents us from really looking at what's going on. It's convenient for us to say they're crazy, they're aggressive, or there's something wrong with them. Right? But if we talk about the behavior in terms of a description, and there's some examples on your screen, it changes how you approach it. Right? When we label things, it often just puts all of the onus on the dog. Stubborn. Nothing to do with me. Nothing I can do to fix it. They're just stubborn. If you're in my class, you know that stubborn is at the top because it's the one that drives me crazy. People are like, my dog is stubborn. I'm like, no, they're not. There's other stuff going on. Okay. So if we combine describing behavior with movement, right? And the movement that we like, curvy movement, moving away, right? This is where your reading of the body language, being able to describe that for yourself in their head so that you're understanding the emotional state of your dog, lets you support them a little bit better. So if you see that your dog is slowing down, support them in that. If you see that they're, scanning, right? You're going to take your dog out and they kind of scan back and forth. What do we usually do? We usually march them forward. Come on, let's go. But your dog is checking out something in the environment. And as you push them to go forward and they're not really comfortable, what's going to happen? What happens to that green zone or that yellow zone? Right? So when you see your dog naturally like moving an arc, stopping, backing up, changing direction before they've had an outburst, you can be confident that they're choosing on their own safety over danger. But when we go for walks, we're like, we're going for a walk and we're going in a straight line and that's what we're doing. And that's where the question comes into play. the goals that you had for your walk and what your walks are really all about. Like when we asked you guys to put those in the chat, those are two very different things. Right? So support your dogs by moving them, moving with them, reinforcing their good choices every single time. Okay, another way of looking at this, and this is from Grisha Stewart, green zone. You want to stay on the beach. Okay, you want to stay on the beach. You don't want to be down here. So a green zone, loose, wiggly. They're not really avoiding a trigger. They might not even really know there's one there. They're relaxing. The blue zone, they're like looking up, gathering information. They might start to kind of approach the trigger a little bit. You've often, probably you guys have seen your dog air scenting. Their heads are lifted, they're sniffing. There might be nothing there that you can see. But we know that your dog can sometimes smell you coming home when you're not even in the driveway yet. But they can smell your car, but we're surprised that they can smell a dog 3 blocks away, right? Like our expectations for that are sometimes just a little bit, they don't match up, right? Yellow zone. You might say their name, takes a few seconds, then they might clue in. Their weight, not really, maybe they're not so sure. Now, if you have the excited greeter, you're probably in here gathering information. Oh, I'm getting super excited, right? You're going to have a little bit of a burst. Red zone here is like the next level of that red light on the previous screen, is when your dog is actually trying to get away. Right. So if you have a dog that's super, super nervous, and they're like, if you have a small dog, sometimes they try and climb up your body. But on a leash, your dog can't get away. Why? Because we like to hold on tight, stand our ground, unless you've been training with me, then, or someone's told you, turn around, create distance. But a lot of the time we stand our ground because that's the direction that we're going on in our walks, right? And it doesn't do our dogs any good. Okay. So you want to keep your dogs in the green and the blue zone. So I think I'm going to pull up, finally it's time. Okay. So what zone does your dog land in most often? I hope you can see the poll and the screen at the same time. And like going to the beach, you're going to go in and out of the water, in and out of the water, but we really want to keep our dogs on the beach. Okay? So a stress level analogous to rising water levels that we don't like. Bunch of you in the blue, which is lovely. Right? So most often when you're on a walk, blue is lovely. Yellow is also pretty good, right? Orange and red zone. If your dog is in that zone often, as a default to their interaction with the outside world, I would highly recommend reaching out to a force-free trainer. It does not have to be me. Talk to your vet. Right? It's certainly something that you can work on with your dog. It's never too late. Okay. I'm going to go back into this chat a little bit. Okay. Very often when we return from a walk, my dog shakes off. So assuming your dog's not wet, a shake off is your dog. So when they're not wet, your dog gives that, right? And they shake themselves off. That's a stress release for your dog. That's dissipating tension. And I'm going to challenge you guys to reward your dogs every time they do it. Every time. Because just like any other behavior, you can get them over time doing that faster. It used to take Logan quite a few blocks for him to be able to do a shake off. Now, depending on the situation, it's sometimes another 20 steps, because every time he did it, I would reinforce it. Backing up into traffic, I would say that she's probably not well aware enough of what's going on. So it's not necessarily safety. It's just her trying to, get away. And if you have a dog that's stopping and backing up before you're even able to get outside, it's something that you're definitely going to want to look into, because that would tell me that your dog is not comfortable with what's outside, or they're anticipating that it's not outside. If it's a thunderstorm and your dog is pulling to go home, go home. Okay, don't try to get them out. Let them go home. Ali, I'm going to talk about this more of the shake off a little bit more. And so, yeah, there's a bunch of you. My dog comes out of the house, looks and barks the first thing. Your dog is over threshold before you even get out the door. Okay, so there's things that we're going to talk about. Yeah, exactly. Color zone depends on the situation. So just we'll keep an eye on that. Okay. It's actually lovely. A lot of you. There we go. I can actually share the results. There we go. You guys can see the results. Awesome. How do you reward a shake off? Depends. For most dogs, it's going to be a treat. It's quick. It's easy. Okay. Now, when I say shake offs will happen more often, that's going to take a long time to build that. Okay. For your dog to kind of put 2 and 2 together. Okay. I don't want to keep you guys till midnight, so we're going to keep going. So revisiting what's behind the pulling. Let's take a look again at what was in that list. For those of you who haven't done a lot of sort of reactivity or things processing, does what's behind the pulling matched with the reasons that they do it and the emotional outburst? Does that make a little bit more sense now? As opposed to your dog's just crazy when they're on their leash. All right. So one of the things that I'm going to bring back to you, because sometimes when we talk about things that, we can reinforce with our dogs, people are like, well, it's like training, right? And we're going to train our dogs to be less reactive. And a really big reminder, at least when it's force-free training, you will see a lot of social media and a lot of websites about training for obedience for reactivity. And I'm going to use one of my other favorite things. We all know that a toddler or a little kid that is asked to sit still is not necessarily calm. Doesn't mean they're processing information. They sit because you told them to sit. It doesn't mean that doesn't mean that internally they feel any better about anything. And this is emotion that we're dealing with, not obedience. If it was simple obedience, we all know our dogs can sit. And if that was true, you wouldn't be here, right? You're here because you tell your dogs to sit sometimes, and they can't sit when they're over aroused. And why can't they sit? Imagine there was something that you were either really, really, really excited about. I don't know what it would be that I would need to be super, super excited about. But let's imagine there was something super, super exciting, or something that you were really nervous of. And I took you and I put a chair on the train tracks, and that train is going to represent either the thing that you're super excited about or the thing that you're super afraid of. And I put you in the chair and I prevent you from leaving. As the train gets closer, the thing that you're super, super excited about, or the thing that you're nervous about, and chances are if you're tied to a chair, the train is going to be the thing that you're nervous about, but let's say it's coming. And I say to you, don't look at it. Look at me. Just sit and look at me. No, look at me. How successful are you going to be? And even if you do look at me, internally, what's happening? Are you becoming more relaxed? If you're excited, are you just getting more pent up because you can't wait to access the thing that's coming? Or if you're nervous, are you getting really, really concerned that you can't look at this thing, but something scary is coming up behind you and you're not really sure what's going to happen? And I know that you have probably all heard to make your dog sit when a trigger is coming. And for some of you, your dogs can keep it together for a little bit, and then the fourth time you ask them to do it, it's not going to happen. If you do manage to get them to sit, it doesn't mean that they're okay. And in the most unfortunate situation, you'll have a dog that is sitting, and at the very last second or the very final moment, because they just can't take it anymore and you're holding a leash and we can't get away, they explode. And then it's what they were fine, and then they bit out of the blue. except they didn't. Now, can my dog just get over it? Or what my favorite is, just fix my dog. My dog is broken, just fix my dog, right? It's far more complicated than that. We wouldn't say to a person who's super anxious or maybe is super excited and super fidgety as their default. We, as a society, have learned that, to say things like, just get over it, get yourself together, figure it out. It doesn't work for people. It also doesn't work for dogs, right? Because we're talking about their emotional state, we are not talking about obedience. There are some dogs that are fabulous at obedience in the ring, right? They can compete at obedience. They're there. But if you walk them down the street and they pass another dog, no can do. Okay, so it's not just about obedience. It is context, situation, the difference, what's reinforced, what's not reinforced, how we handle things. Jumping into why we don't use punishment or aversives. There's all kinds of different rationales for why you should train a certain way. As a force-free trainer, we don't use punishment or aversives to train, period. Never mind reactivity, because punishment doesn't teach an alternate behavior. So a leash correction, a physical jerk, yelling, you name it, all the things that you've probably heard, things you can do with your dog if they're not doing what you want, doesn't teach your dog what to do instead. It does teach them how to avoid punishment, right? Puppies, if you freak out when they have an accident on the floor, does it teach them not to have an accident? No, it teaches them not to pee in front of you. So then they'll go behind somewhere and hide because then you won't see it and it's going to be safer. Okay? No, telling your dog no is not a behavior, right? Even if we're not talking about reactivity, saying no to your dog all the time does not teach them what to do instead. They might stop doing what they're doing, but it doesn't tell them what you wanted them to do instead. All right. Slightly worse down the scale, it encourages negative associations. So if I see a dog and I'm punished when I exhibit my natural communication, every time I see a dog now, what am I going to think? Bad things happen. And if we're taking that similar example, say out of human leash hands, and we'll talk about electric fences. I know where a lot of you live, electronic fences are part of life, big properties, right? It's super expensive to fence a property. So we came up with electric fences, and I get it. But quite often, if you have reactive dogs, and even if you don't, if a person coming towards the house crosses that line, that little fence line, the dog crosses that little fence line, and they get a little bit of a jolt, that's a punishment. Very often happens that you end up with dogs with barrier frustration, because every time they see a person and they run towards it, they get punished. So using punishment encourages negative associations with the trigger. And at the very worst, it suppresses your dog's natural emotional signals and warning. And as other trainers on this call will certainly attest to, my dog bit out of the blue is almost never true. There's body language, there's signals, but if you had an example where a dog has been used to punishment, they'll skip the bark, they skip the growl, they skip the snarl, and they'll just go straight to the bite. Because we've suppressed through punishment their ability to go, I am not comfortable. And when they do it, we'll ignore them. Dougie is very cute. If you have questions sort of about this, right? Comforting your dog, we'll talk about this a bit tomorrow, Sophie, but comforting your dog when they are stressed is not reinforcing fear. You cannot reinforce fear the way you reinforce behavior. So if your dog is stressed out, comfort them. Dogs are not children, but let's use this analogy. If a kid is super, super, super scared of something and you come along and you give them a hug, does that make them feel more scared? Like, I really hope the answer is no. Otherwise, you're probably not giving them a hug the right way. Okay. If somebody is anxious or nervous about something and you come along and you comfort them, it does not make them more anxious. Okay. You can reinforce behavior. You cannot reinforce fear by comforting. Okay. Karen has written, do you not do punishment? And I'm not entirely sure what you mean, but if I'm just going to take that at sort of face value, reading it myself as a trainer and a dog owner, no, I do not punish dogs. If this is me on a soapbox now, if you're feeling the need to punish your dog frequently, and I'm not saying, Karen, that that's what you're saying, just if people approaching dog training or dog behavior feel the need to punish their dog often or correct their dog often, I'm going to argue that there is something about that learning experience or something that you're doing with your dog that is not setting them up for success. Right? How you teach your dog matters, and it's convenient to use punishment. It's less convenient and more time consuming to think about what it is you're doing to set up the environment so that their behavior can be successful, so that you can reinforce what you want instead. So no bite if a dog nips, but instead ouch. Well, I mean, I think you mean saying no bite versus ouch. Those are words that don't necessarily mean anything to your dog. Right? Sit, down, stay, all of those things didn't mean anything to your dog until you paired it with a reinforcement. So Sarah, feel free to message me after, but I'm just going to take that a little bit offline. Same with anyone who's saying, my dog bites me a lot. If you have a dog that bites you a lot, I invite you to book a call. And whether it's recommending that you work with somebody who's closer to you or talking about what that looks like, that's great. But in any training situation, whether it's reactivity or separation anxiety or whatever it is, human safety is a big deal, right? If you're being bitten by your dog, I'm not going to say punish your dog. I'm going to say we need to look at why it is that's happening and take the steps so that you're safe. So 4 steps to changing behavior: managing the environment. So we're talking about distance and knowing what your dog's triggers are and managing that. Learning to recognize changes in your dog's body language so that you can anticipate and prevent escalations, because the more your dog has a chance to escalate, the more they're going to have a chance to escalate, the more stressed out they're going to be. What we're going to be talking about tomorrow is how to create predictable opportunities for your dogs to make different choices. Again, people who have worked with me or have heard me talk about stuff like this before, I am very much about teaching. Now, we're not about holding dogs accountable. It's another thing I see on social media that drives me crazy. Human beings have a frontal lobe to process judgments and morality so that they can be held accountable. Dogs don't. So saying that we're holding our dogs accountable really means that we need to be setting them up to be able to make choices. And our dogs' choices are very limitable. What's reinforced, what's not, what's safe, what's not, to make different choices. And in some cases for reactive dogs, predictable opportunities where they can say, we'll use Logan as an example. He's a terrier. He likes to chase squirrels. I like my sockets in my arms where they belong. So predictable would be in the training that we've done. You see a squirrel, you look at me, we're going to have a great time together. We'll go off and we'll play a little game. We'll do something. And so it becomes not a don't chase the squirrel, I'm going to give you a leash pop. It's squirrels are fun. Like, I get it. Squirrels are fun. And if you're off leash, you can chase a squirrel. But when you're on leash, highly reinforced behavior, look at me instead, and let's go do something else. Right? Support your dog and reinforce them. Comfort them. Move them away. Right? Reinforce the shake off. These obviously high level steps. When we're talking about really like training plans, there's hundreds of steps that come in between them, but at a high level, this is the approach that you're looking at. Okay. So you've got a dog on any given day who has a bunch of triggers that's happened. You have your idea of taking them for a walk, for enrichment or exercise or to fulfill their needs. And then you've got your idea that potentially you want to do some training. A pretty big stumbling block for a lot of people is just deciding, because that's what's on your list to do today, that's what you're going to do. But what I might ask you to do instead is assess your dog first. What's their state of mind? What happened today? Do they really need an hour-long walk where they might encounter 15 different dogs and then enrichment didn't happen, relaxation didn't happen? You certainly didn't enjoy the walk. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't easy. It wasn't enjoyable, right? Assess the situation, your environment, your time of day, your neighborhood, figure out all of those things, and then decide. Do we just do a safari somewhere quiet, somewhere inside? Do we meet our dog's needs for enrichment in a different way? There are so many different ways that we can provide our dogs the mental stimulation they need that don't include going for a walk. Or maybe your dog's seems really eager and is really engaged with you because you spent some time on that, and you think, okay, maybe they're okay for some training. Great. So then do that. But don't mix a training with walks, right? Walks are walks. Training is training. So if you're walking along and you've decided to do some training and your dog doesn't know that behavior, but you're like, let's do it on a walk while we're walking down the street, chances are you will not be successful. At the very least, you won't be building reliable behavior. So training, as we're going to talk about tomorrow, is a small, short activity that you do for a discrete period of time, and it's not on a walk, right? And you can only do training when your dog is on the green zone. The training moment is not in the yellow zone, it's not in the red zone, and it is barely in the blue zone. You need a very relaxed, easygoing dog. Think about how our brains work best to learn. It is not when you are stressed out. Okay? I mean, just if you look at studies like neuroscience studies, a brain that is super agitated does not process information the same way. Or maybe your dog's, pretty good. You don't really want to do training. You don't think they might be as receptive. LL stands for loose leash. Maybe we can do a loose leash walk. Maybe we think about not going the whole 18 blocks. Maybe we just start walking and we're like, that was a 6-block walk. They did really well. Should I push it? If you think about your walks and your behaviors and your patterns in your environment, in your neighborhoods, at 6:30 at any given day between Monday to Friday, what's going to happen in your environment. I think Danielle and Matthew have told me about there's an area in town at a certain times of day, pizza crusts, chicken wings, like that's full on. It's a party if you wanted your dog to get into that kind of thing. But assessing where your dog is prepared to go on that walk. I'm going to super be encouraging you guys, and most of you are going to be skeptical about not walking your dogs for as long as you think you need to. Right? There's different ways to get out physical energy. There's different ways to give them that stimulation. There's a couple of questions in here that are a little bit outside of the scope of what I can responsibly give advice to. So again, it's the biting, grabbing of jackets and things like that. It really depends on what the scenario is, your dog in that individual context. So feel free to, again, book a call. All right, but it's just something that's just a little bit outside of me being able to give you an answer on a webinar. Safari can be on leash or off leash. It doesn't matter. What matters is where your dog is safe. So if in your backyard, off leash. If you're just in a quiet spot and you're anywhere in public where there are leash laws, it's leashed. And we're going to talk about safaris and I think it's tomorrow, right? How to best do that. If your dog wants to go home, even though it's been a few houses away, should I take her home? And I will say it depends on the context. So again, just a little bit more detailed. Some dogs go outside and they know a thunderstorm is coming. Right? Some dogs are not into it, but you might want to look at what things you can do to build confidence. How to book a call, you guys are going to get an email at the end of tonight with some information about that. Walking. So my favorite gear for walking, this is my boy, if you guys haven't seen him before. So front versus back, doesn't really matter. But you've heard me say before, easy walk harness, not my favorite, and not my favorite for a couple of reasons. The reason that it works as a no pull harness is because it restricts their shoulders together and restricts their gait. And so it's called no pull because supposedly they won't pull. But if you have a dog on an easy walk, you've been pulled. You know that it can still happen. At worst, it actually over time can cause shoulder gait issues. Okay, so you want a Y harness. This is an example of a Y harness. I put this on so that you can see where his neck actually is, which is where a collar and some of your more traditional harnesses might sit, and where a Y harness sits. Further down, you know, away from a lot of, there's still glands and things, but away from that sort of sensitive neck area, it's further down where I guess your collar, like just a bit further down. So there's some brands that I like that are on here. Your harness isn't fitting right if your dog can wiggle out of it. And there's a couple of reasons why that's a problem. If there's chafing under the armpits or around the harness, if they're losing fur around the harness area, chafing's a little bit different than mats, right? A lot of our dogs get slight mats from the harness, and that's going to happen. But if you've got like down to the skin kind of chafing, if the chest strap loosens on your walk and starts to like go from side to side, or if your back piece rotates, right? So if your harness is actually rotating around your dog, yes, it rotates because they pull, but ideally it should, you know, not shift too far away. So that is going to be my preferred for any dog that I'm working with, and any clients that I'm working with is going to be a Y-shaped harness. I like the Perfect Fit harness too. It's not on here, but it is another one of my favorites and very customizable. A head harness, very common. It's not going to be the thing that I would recommend that you use long term. For a lot of dogs, steering them around by their head does not build a positive emotional association, right? If you're yanking your dog around by their head, not to mention that it's their head, right? There's a lot of dogs too for which this is pretty uncomfortable. So imagine that this strap is like here. However, I understand why they're important for people to use to feel safe while walking, to feel like you have, you know, some control. And so typically what I'll do with my clients, if they are already using something like that, is I'm not going to tell you to stop using it because that's what you're comfortable with. But I would propose we start to sort of phase that out, because ideally you're probably going to want to be able to walk your dog at some point where you don't have a head harness, right? It's that whole thing between reliance on tools and changing their emotional state. It's a great question. Okay, leashes, we're going to talk about a little bit, and then I think I'm going to stop talking. So leashes, right? There are rope leashes, there's webbing leashes, there's biothane leashes, there's all kinds of leashes. There's leashes that are long lines meant for being able to move around in space that's just a little bit bigger, right? There's leash material that either is super light or is waterproof. Ideally, the leash that you're going to work with is one that's comfortable for you. I know that I've converted a few people to my favorite, but that's not required. Okay. And if you're working with reactivity, I'm going to suggest that 6 feet is really short. I bet you guys have a really hard time keeping any slack in your leash when it's 6 feet long. Right? I'm not going to say 15. That's a whole different skill set. But even an additional 3 feet, so 9 feet or something like that, right? It doesn't mean that I work with and walk all dogs on about a 9-foot leash. It doesn't mean that you're going to allow your dog to be 9 feet away from you. You can still have your dog 6 feet. But if your dog wanted to go sniff and you don't want to be hauled over onto the grass too, slightly longer lets your dog go sniff and come back, right? As opposed to 6 feet. It's not that far, 6 feet, right? But this is definitely something where getting used to that, it's a human comfort thing, right? We've seen lots of really good for people who, everybody can't see everybody, but for those of you who have your cameras on, if you have tried a slightly longer leash and found it more enjoyable for your dog and yourselves, I see a couple of hands up. It's one of the things thank you, Catherine. It's one thing that I liked when I know that Daniel and Susan, yep, it's one of my biggest things. Now, what about 9 feet with a big dog? I'm afraid of losing a finger. How you handle your leash is a human skill. It's not a dog skill, it's a human skill. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So you guys are going to be taking a leash, whether it's 6 feet or 9 foot, whatever you have. And you guys are going to be practicing a safer leash hold and getting used to managing a leash, right? So yeah, your dog, you can have a 9 foot leash, but it doesn't mean that your dog has 9 feet all the time, right? If you're holding a leash with both hands, again, we're going to do this tomorrow, okay? But if I had a leash, and I don't have one because it's for tomorrow, but leash in one hand, also rest of the leash in this hand, you've got slack between 9 feet to sniff, 4 feet close to me, right? It's a human leash handling is a human skill, right? Okay. I didn't mention what my favorite leash is, but I'll drop it in there for you guys. Okay. So walking on a collar instead of a harness, assuming you're talking about a flat collar, typical flat webbing collar. The reason I do not like that, and I don't recommend it, and I would love it if other trainers might pop that in the chat too. Your regular collar for most dogs, if you have a reactive dog, any kind of lunging, any kind of pulling puts pressure around their neck. So especially if you've heard your dog and they pull and they're just like, they sound like they're choking themselves. That's not good, right? Physically, that's not good. For their health, that's not good, right? This whole neck area, and please don't let people fool you into telling you that the dog's neck skin is thicker than yours. It's super sensitive, like you, just like us, right? Their neck. If you had this around your neck all the time, there's going to be pressure applied to the neck just by default, right? That's why I prefer a harness, protects the neck. Retractables, if you have a reactive dog, using a retractable makes proper leash handling very difficult, right? So you're welcome to try it tomorrow with your retractable leash. It's not something that I recommend. Most people with retractable leashes don't use them the best way that they can. There's a time and a place for that. Training is not one of them, is my personal opinion. Okay, front hook or back hook with harnesses depends. And it depends on how your dog is walking. You can cause, unevenness with both things. You might choose to have a leash attached in the back for one activity, like a safari, where they're just kind of meandering or going for a hike. You might choose to have a front clip or use the front clip depending on the circumstances. So it depends. Daycare using a metal prong, I would have that discussion with them. They probably use it because it's under the guise of being able to control your dog when they take it outside. If you're not comfortable with it and they don't want to change it, it's something that for me personally, I would be thinking about whether it's somewhere I wanted my dog to continue to go. If they're using prong as a way to control or manage a dog, I would also want to know how else they're addressing behavior when they're not on a walk, right? Those things often go hand in hand. What equipment people use and how they approach training is something that often goes hand in hand. We're at 2 hours. I actually want to talk to you guys. So we're going to save why we use food and a few other things for tomorrow. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn my attention over to you all. And then if you do have to run, understand I didn't put on the harness and lunged at kangaroos. I mean, a lot of dogs, every dog here, I bet you would lunge at a kangaroo. Okay, so give yourself some slack. It's okay. Leash recommendations, again, it depends on what you're comfortable with. Okay, I like something that's nice and light. If you have to run, feel free to run. Otherwise, I will stay on for another 50 minutes and ask any questions. And I will see you guys tomorrow at 7. Same link. You'll get that in your emails. If you check your spam, I might end up in there. And from those of you attending from all kinds of time zones, I really, really, really appreciate it. The recording is still running. You'll get the recording as well. These will be quick questions. If you guys have quick questions, I'll stick around to answer them, but we're not doing any hardcore behavior assessments right now. You will get a reminder 15 minutes again for tomorrow. Okay, and tomorrow you will be working with your dogs. Okay. If you have a question and you're still on, unmute yourself. I'll push you guys over here so I can see everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question. We actually we have two dogs, and they are very different. At home, they have kind of the same triggers for reactivity, but on a walk, one is super afraid, and the other is super reactive to other dogs. But when training at home, what's the best way when you have two dogs to do the training? Because like they are likely not respond the same, right?
Right. When you have two dogs, I urge people to spend the time training separately. Right. So even just if it was a basic distraction, right?
Mhm.
If you start reinforcing one dog for something that the other dog, when another dog is doing something else, it can be very confusing for them. So you typically want to, and this is hard with triggers because noises happen and dogs are going to react, right? But for some of the stuff we're going to be doing tomorrow, it's take your dog to a quiet spot, keep the other dog having some fun, doing something else, and build that up with one dog. Do the same thing with the other dog, and then understanding that when you put them both together, they usually poison each other's success. Right. So one, because they're just going to progress differently. Best case scenario is one goes, I know what to do, and the other one goes, oh yeah, I'll do that too. Right. But it doesn't typically happen that way quite so quickly.
But then we would put like one in like a kennel with treat or like a Kong or whatever, and then like, because we actually live in a small apartment, so we can't
Right.
like physically separate them too much, like put it one in one room and the other one in the other.
Whatever separation you're going to use needs to be reinforcing. So if you're not used to putting that dog in the kennel with something good, if they can't handle that generally, I wouldn't do that. It might be just they go to a bedroom or around the corner and just like have some fun.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi, Yasmin. How are you?
Good. How are you? My
Good,
question
thank you.
is, how do you stop him from eating stuff on the street when we're like taking him on a walk? Because sometimes there's like chicken bones and like random stuff on the sidewalk, and like we can't even see it, and then
Right.
he just grabs it and he wouldn't leave it.
Okay. So there's training and then there's management. So if you're not able to avoid the area that's the buffet on the street, then like that's the first thing. The second thing would be training to drop or training to trade, which doesn't happen overnight, right? Several weeks, couple of months sometimes. So then the management piece is conditioning a really solid, positive, enjoyable response to wearing a muzzle. Right? Muzzle dogs are good dogs. He hates it because we haven't taught him how to do it the right way. So training a dog for a muzzle is not, here's a muzzle, I'm putting it on your face. Training a dog for a muzzle is a multi-step positive reinforcement approach, right? But taking a dog and just putting the muzzle on, yeah, if I tied something around your head and you weren't expecting it, it wouldn't be good. Right?
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Hi, can I ask you a quick one?
Of course. Hey, Sheila.
Hi. Just because I was looking at those recommendations for harnesses, and Scarlett actually has an easy walk that fits her terribly. It's not right for her physiology. Is there one in particular you think fits a deep-chested dog well?
So my favorite for customizing sort of her body is the Perfect Fit harness.
Okay.
And it's great for the winter because it's fleecy padded, right? It's a little harder in the summer, but I've seen dogs, do it in the summer, especially if they're like, I like heat sun dogs kind of thing. But the Perfect Fit harness is like I think there's like 4 pieces to it. And you'd have to take a whole bunch of measurements, but they basically send you the configuration that works for your dogs as close as you can for your dog's body. There was somebody who's not on here anymore that uses a Perfect Fit for their sort of deeper chest dog, and it's great. Like you can customize it for growing dogs too. Like I know Scarlett's done growing, fingers crossed, but for growing dogs too, sometimes you can swap out the pieces as they grow. It's pretty cool.
Okay.
So Perfect Fit, and you're gonna find that there might be other vendors, but if you Google Dr. Tobias, his Canadian site, I think they are distributors for the Perfect Fit harness.
Okay, cool. I'll check that out.
Cool. Letitia, Yasmin, Letitia sent Yasmin a message. Thank you guys for hanging out to the end. I see quite a few faces of people that I know that have worked with me before or seen this. Seen me. Rosa, are you Rosa from the workroom, Rosa? Yeah, hi. I haven't seen you in forever. And also Steve. I haven't seen Steve in forever. So thank you for coming, and Joseph and Daniel and Yasmin. Mallory is still on with us, and Sheila, also haven't seen Sheila in forever. I'm super psyched that you guys stuck around. If you don't have any more questions, we are going to call it a night. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Dogs, treats, and set yourself up in a place where you have a little bit of room to move around. Okay. All right. Have a great night, guys. I'm going to drop you the recording. Say good night. Okay. Bye.